It was a corporate company and it was an office job. And I remember going to work in what was probably like a clubbing outfit, thinking that that was okay because no one had ever worked in an office in my family. No one knew that you had to wear a pencil skirt and a twin set and pearls to, navigate this environment.
Hi, and welcome to A Class of Their Own podcast, revealing the human stories behind their name. We will hear honest and intimate reflections from our guests who, despite their circumstances, shape a world that reflects their unique visions of success. Join me, Mira Magecha, to learn from these inspirational people and take the first step to make your own change. On today's episode, we're joined by Yvonne Matzk. Hi Yvonne, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for coming.
You're welcome.
And I'm looking forward to hearing the story. We were introduced in a funny kind of way because a previous guest was unable to make her slot. So she suggested that we connect because you've got an amazing story to share. And so we met over the airwaves and now here you are sitting in front of me.
Yep, it was obviously meant to be, but thanks for having me on.
So we start the podcast with who is Yvonne?
Which one? Which version of Yvonne? The mum Yvonne, the career Yvonne, the old Yvonne?
Exactly. That's why you get to choose and I don't do an intro because you get to define who Yvonne is.
So currently, Yvonne is the CEO and founder of a coaching consulting business called Co-Chair. I'm also the chair and founder of a free of charge mentoring program for the channel called the Channel Community, and a mother and wife and friend. That's me now.
And so where did Yvonne start? Where did the journey of what you do and why you do what you do start?
Really interesting question. I think we all talk about purpose, and having been in the world of corporate for many, many years, I just sort of discovered when we got acquired by a massive, large global corporate that the world of large global corporate probably wasn't suited for me. And I was very fortunate to have the opportunity to make a decision to change career. I didn't know at the time what that was going to be. I just knew that I needed to step out of that world and do something completely different. And I think it was on that journey that I realised what it was that I enjoyed. When you get that time to totally step out of something that's so full on, you get that opportunity to really reflect and start to think about what it is that you enjoy, what it is that drives you, what motivates you. And money's never been my driver. It never has, never will be. It's always been supporting, nurturing, encouraging other people. And because I've come from fairly humble beginnings myself, I've always wanted to pay it forward. So when I left the world of corporate, I wanted to explore other alternatives rather than just going back to another big job. I decided that I wanted to explore coaching. That's what led me to retraining, becoming a business coach, and then fulfilling that dream of just being able to give back was why the channel community was founded, because not everyone has the ability to afford a coach or work for a large enough organisation to have access to mentors. And I wanted to fill that gap. So it was very much more purpose-driven as opposed to career-driven.
So take us back to where and how you grew up.
So I had a very lovely upbringing and, grew up in a really small town called St Neots in Cambridgeshire, which actually now it's been gentrified. It's really lovely and people actually want to live there.
Right.
When I grew up there, it wasn't like that. I mean, I think it had more pubs than people, a traditional old market town with no investment. The types of, things that we were known for were its riots. So it was quite an interesting place to grow up. My parents, I was born in a council house, but they worked incredibly hard to buy their first house. But a lot of my friends were on a council estate. So I spent a lot of my time growing up around people that even had less than I did.
Yeah.
Which is another reason why I think I've always been very, even though as I've grown up and being very fortunate to work my way up and have the life I have now, I'm always still very mindful that not everyone has that same privilege or opportunity.
And I love that word, mindful, that you're very mindful about that.
100%. Yeah, I'm always incredibly conscious of it. Never take anything for granted. I think that's what's always made me incredibly grateful. And also, I feel incredibly privileged to be where I am now. And I know I've worked for it. I know no one gave me anything, but still, I'm incredibly lucky.
Yeah.
And I never take any of that for granted.
So when you say you're really grateful, you never take it for granted, you're really lucky, how did you get onto your journey coming from the market town in Cambridge?
So it's really so when I grew up, it was a case of you either get a job or you go to college. That was sort of how it evolved. So education, I was state educated. And there was no real discussion or talk in my family around going to university. My dad was a welder. My mum was a cleaner. She worked in factories. She worked in shops. So there was no one had ever worked in an office, let alone gone to university. So I knew that I didn't want to go on to further education. So I wanted to get a job. But I did still want to continue with some sort of form of education. So I left college. I did a year and didn't work out, and decided I was going to go and get an apprenticeship.
Okay.
Well, I said decided that there was about 3 jobs in the paper. So one of them was this. There wasn't like there was a lot of choice, to be honest.
There wasn't a lot of decision making going on. There wasn't a lot of options.
No, it was like, okay, no, I don't want to be working a shop. I don't want to do that. Oh, this one looks quite interesting. And it was the largest company, one of the largest employees in the time in St. Neots. A company called Grace's, but the division called Terrazon, which actually got bought out by a massive, large global corporate called Henkel. Not many people have heard of Henkel, but they make cosmetics, car sealants, lots of chemical type products. And they were advertising for this YTS apprenticeship, like working in an office. I thought, that's all right. And then went for the interview. Found out it was £35 a week. And I went to my mum and said, I'm not working for that. She goes, well, you're not staying at home. I was like, oh, okay, then off I go. And that was how it happened. Wow. And it was literally a YTS apprenticeship starting on £35 a week as an admin assistant. And ironically, there was 100 people went for that job.
Wow.
For £35 a week.
What could you have made in that point? Like how... In today's world, £35 a week is just unheard of. But then was that, where was that on the scale of salaries, I suppose? Well,
I've got 2 older siblings, and my sister is 10 years older than me and my brother is 8 years older than me. So when they left school, my sister went to work in a knicker factory, sewing knickers.
Yeah.
And they actually got paid quite well. So in the whole scheme, if you went and worked in a factory, you'd be getting maybe £200 a week.
Okay. So £35 was really low.
Yeah, that was ridiculous. But obviously I didn't want to go and work in a factory. That was, I knew that wasn't
where you wanted
where I wanted to go. So my brother was working in a factory as well, but it was sort of, that wasn't the route that I wanted to go down. But yeah, in terms of had I chose the money side, I would have gone to work in a factory, but I knew that wasn't for me.
And what was it that you knew wasn't for you in terms of the factory work? What was it that was sparking inside you that said, I want to do something different to what I know and what my parents have done and what my siblings have done?
Actually, it was my sister again. And I think because of her being a lot more older than me, I saw her regret her decision. And decide that she wanted to retrain and didn't want to work in a factory anymore. So she had to at the age of 28, made that conscious decision to leave the factory and retrain. She's now actually a fully qualified management accountant, so she's doing incredibly well. But having that role model, so they talk about role models teaching you the positives in life, but also what not to do as well. So I think that was the kick up the bottom for me, to realise you don't want to be in that position where you want to have to start all over again at the age of 28. About time I butt my ideas up and got on with it now.
Yeah.
So again, I feel very privileged to have had my sister as the role model of showing me what not to do, as opposed to positive role models that show you what to,
what to
good things
actually
to do. Yeah.
And when we think about what you said earlier, which is you're very mindful of the people around you, and you grew up in a council estate and then you moved, but you were always close to a council estate and close to people who lived on a council estate. As you've grown, for a better term, become socially mobile and gone through those ranks and got the salary levels and got the job titles, what has that meant in terms of your friendships, the way that you work, how you shop, all of the societal norms that come with having more money?
Again, another really interesting point, because it was only recently that I started looking at this myself, because everything's happened very gradually and very organically. It wasn't like a 1 minute I was living in St Neots, next minute I'm a director of a large global corporate. It was a very gradual sort of transition. And my friends range from single parents, who I've got friends that have died of alcoholism. I know people that are heroin addicts, to CEOs of top global FTSE 100 companies. And I'm still as in touch with the people and still friends with the people that are from the less privileged backgrounds than I am the CEOs. And I just think I've had to teach myself to navigate that world and adapt accordingly, to be accepted. And I think you have to, to survive the corporate world, you have to do that anyway. And I was speaking to a friend very recently, and they didn't know my background, and we were talking about the work we're just about to embark with the Channel community and the Social Mobility Foundation. And they said, "But Yvonne, you're too posh to be poor." I was like, and it just made me nearly like spit out my drink. I was like, oh my goodness, I've never been called posh in my entire life. But to survive the corporate world and to be accepted, you mask your upbringing.
Right.
Because you have to. Because the Yvonne that was, growing up in that environment, would not survive or be accepted in the large corporate world as a director. It just wouldn't have happened. So it's sort of, you almost take on this acting role.
And what was the acting or masking that you had to do? How did you learn to do it? How did you learn what you needed to do to survive and to be successful?
I think one of the things that you learn is how to adapt your behaviours. I think if I think about all the things that have held me back in my career and maybe slowed, if you take somebody who come from a more privileged upbringing, their career would have been far more accelerated than mine was, because their point of entry would have been higher, their opportunities, their network, all would have been, much more made available to them than I had to figure it all out myself. But also it's the social behaviour type aspects that I think I had to learn. And that came with failing a lot and in a lot of embarrassment and a lot of situations that, even the first time, my first job, like I said, it was YTS, but it was a corporate company and it was an office job. And I remember going to work in what was probably like a clubbing outfit, thinking that was okay, because no one had ever worked in an office in my family. No one knew that you had to wear a pencil skirt and a twin set and pearls to, navigate this environment. So it was situations like that. So from learning what to wear
Right.
to learning what cutlery to use, learning that steak actually can come in various cooking degrees, these types of, and also how to behave, when me and my sister joke about this, that we brought ourselves up. Both our parents were working, so you just sort of got on with it. You don't get taught some of the social
etiquette
that life that other people take for granted.
Yeah.
So I think it was having to learn those things through learning that wasn't acceptable and looking at people's reactions to situations. I mean, I take the mickey out myself all the time, so I laugh about it, but not everybody can do that. And I think those situations for a lot of people would have held them back and probably stopped them from trying to.
From the fear of humiliation.
Yeah. And I talk to people about this quite a lot.
One of the things we talked about when we had our initial chat was, which just reminded me as you were saying that, was how would you like your steak? And you said cooked.
That's it.
And you were looked at and there was a whole joke around it afterwards, but that was a learning moment for you from what you said.
It was a massive learning moment for me. And it was, I'd never eaten steak. I'd never even gone to a restaurant. We didn't have takeaways or go to restaurants in my house. It was, I think, probably once a year as a massive treat. We didn't have the disposable income. We were lucky to survive living in, I didn't have free school meals or anything like that, but we didn't have extra cash to go and to a steakhouse.
Yeah.
So it was those types of scenarios. And you go to a restaurant and you've got extra sets of knives and forks. I mean, what's that all about? Why do you need
more?
Yeah.
They need to now be washed.
Yes, but it's just like, it's a bit like the Julia Roberts moment in Pretty Woman. It's clearly not, but that type of not understanding these social etiquettes and that it's not accepted, and then later on in my career, it's not, how you interact with your seniors. I think because there's no hierarchy when you grow up in an, environment like myself, it's just sort of, you figure it all out for yourself and each for their own, as opposed to sometimes people don't like you to have an opinion.
So tell me about that. So what was it about the hierarchies, the corporates having an opinion? What did you learn from that? Because this sounds like an interesting, diggable story.
I think when you're so passionate about something and you believe in something that doesn't sit, or you see behaviours or things happening that sit outside of your values, you find it less easy to just tolerate and accept it. So you become a bit more vocal than maybe people would like. And then by vocalising it and making it known, then people then have to deal with it. And I think one thing I've learned is not everybody wants to deal with these things, because that would highlight that they have to agree and accept that it's happening, but also they'd have to do something about it. I think, and I'm not talking for every organisation or every individual, but I feel there's a lot of complacency that maybe happens because people aren't willing to stick their neck out because they like the comfort of the job that they're in, or not wanting to upset the apple cart or offend certain people. Especially in a sales environment, you see it a lot, because the high-performing salespeople seem to get away with a lot more than the back office operational people, and they're allowed to treat people in ways that is not acceptable because they're high-performing salespeople.
Yeah, and I hear that. I hear that really a lot, actually, because, for example, the world that I work in or the former world I worked in was in people. And so I would hear lots and lots of case studies and examples of incredibly bad behavior, as you would call it, within the sales teams and functions. But it was almost a blind eye because they were the ones that bringing in the revenue. But yet they were the ones that were creating the challenges from a diversity, from an inclusion, from a tolerance, from a toxic behavior point of view within the organization. But it was let slip because they were revenue generating people. So I get it, but it's a really challenging place to then work and not be part of the sales team.
Yeah, it's, you know, and I sort of pivoted both sides. So I had, in the corporate world, I've come from sales myself.
Yeah.
So I've been in those roles, but in high performing sales environments that are very male dominated, there is still a lot of bad behaviours that go without being, you know, dealt with because people are too afraid to actually have those conversations.
Yeah. So if we think about your career and where you are today,
Yeah.
was there a pivotal moment that helped you change direction post the merger of the organisation? Or was it always within you to want to do something differently?
That's a really good question, because I think I would have, had we not been acquired, I probably would have still been in the company that pre-acquisition.
Yeah.
Because that was a very much more entrepreneurial, dynamic, fast-paced, change-making organisation that treated people as equals, and there was no hierarchy, there was no structure. There was structure, but you know, when I joined that organisation, it was a lot smaller than it grew to become acquired. The culture of the business was fun. There was the CEO, the founder and the CEO at the time, didn't tolerate a lot of the stuff that seemed to got accepted and more tolerant once it got acquired, because once you get acquired by a big, large global corporate who are US headquartered, they're not really, it felt like because we were performing as a business, they didn't really care about some of that stuff. And I'm sure they did, but the leadership probably didn't deal with it because they were still doing incredibly well. So a lot of that hierarchy, the structure, the politics, the behaviours type, it became more of a political game than actually doing the right thing and wanting to.
And can you give me an example of what was going on at that point in terms of, yes, it became a little bit more political, but what was the behaviours that frustrated you, I suppose, that meant that you didn't want to stay anymore?
So I think the main ones were around certain people that probably weren't at the level that they should be being accepted to do the job. Whereas if you're a high performer, or doing a really good job, you tended to get more work given to you. Whereas there was people that weren't necessarily performing at the level they should be for the role that they were in, but because they were mates or of the, other people, they were tolerated and allowed to, and certain behaviours were allowed to be accepted that should have been dealt with because of who they were friends with as opposed to the job that they were doing.
Fine. So there was
I'm trying to be very demographic. Demographic? Look, I can't. There you go. The real Yvonne's coming out now, isn't she?
So there were a lot of political games in terms of high performance, in terms of dealing with performance issues. And if you happen to be the friend and the mate of a leadership person, then some of these things were ignored. And that's really bloody frustrating.
Really frustrating. And I think there was lack of respect for other people. And there was a lot of people just felt that they could treat others not okay because of their role that they were in or who they knew. And it was never dealt with. Yeah. Ironic. The thing is, a lot of that has been dealt with now. These things always get worked out. And I always say this, people will always get figured out. People always get uncovered. It's just the carnage and the damage that they cause in the process on the way.
Absolutely. What was the feedback you got at school?
What, from my teachers or my peers?
From your teachers.
At primary school, it would have been all incredibly positive.
Okay.
I was I was like a, perfect student in that regard. I was always top of, one or two in terms of academic ability.
Yeah.
Naturally sports driven, played hockey and tennis for Cambridgeshire, played the violin. So it's like the model student.
And then what happened?
I went to senior school. And I think also, and I've done a lot of thinking about this recently because I was trying to piece some things together. You know yourself, it's like about, you start to try and unpick how these things have happened and get to the root as to what changed you and why did I go from being a grade A type student to coming out with just scraping through 5 GCSEs when I was, could have gone on to do a lot better. And I think a lot of that comes from realising that quite early on that the better you were, the less liked you were. And starting from the sports, playing tennis and the bullying that I received through that, through to because I was from a very low, lower socioeconomic background for the people I was playing tennis with.
I was literally just thinking, why would you get bullied for playing tennis?
Yeah, because your mum's the cleaner of the club.
Yeah.
The only reason I played was because it was at the end of my road and I took myself off there when I was little to put my name down. And why I was allowed to walk down to a tennis club next to a river at the age of 6, who knows? But that was what, gave me my passion for sport. And being really good at sport came with a lot of consequences around other people's jealousy. And when I went to senior school, because I was so good at sport, I got a lot of privileges that probably shouldn't have been allowed. I was allowed to bunk off school knowingly without any being reprimanded because my head of year only cared about me turning up for the hockey match. That's probably not conducive to having a successful academic career. But also when you are good and you are sort of standing out from your peer group, that comes with a lot of bullying from your peer, so I'd be playing hockey and I'd be getting attacked on the hockey pitch by my school friends because they didn't like, I was different, they'd never had anyone play tennis or hockey for Cambridgeshire at my school. So I was put on this ridiculous pedestal by my teachers and by my parents, and I realised that with that came a lot of pressure and a lot of jealousy and caused people not to like you. So I rebelled. I was like, well, I know how to be liked. I'll just not
do
bother.
These things.
Yeah. And the people that seem to not do a lot are the more popular people. So it's sort of, and that also stems from my sister as well. There was a lot of jealousy from her growing up. Understandably so. I won't go into our background or her background, but in terms of we had very different upbringings. So for her, I was very lucky compared to the start that she had per se. So a lot of that got taken out on me because she was only young as well. And you don't realize, we're the best of friends now, but she hated me right up until I was about 16.
Yeah. I understand sibling rivalry big time. And so in terms of what comes up for you now, when you think about your adulthood, what comes up for you today that you reflect back and go, that was so me as a child and it still keeps popping up and rearing its head?
That sort of feeling when I don't like being, so I really don't like people celebrating my achievements. So I'm really don't, because of every time people would reward me or say I've done a really good job, a negative thing would happen. And it's that went on into corporate world. So every time I'd won an award through my sales career or through the role as, leading a partner management team, every time something positive happened, there'd be somebody there ready to bash you back down again. So that started from when I was a youngster, and those feelings of not wanting to celebrate your achievements always trigger back to those points. So, but then in the same time, knowing what I know now, that's driven and motivated me to try and help people appreciate and celebrate so it's a double-edged sword, because you go from not wanting to do it to now actually, if you don't do it, Yvonne, you're not going to be that role model to that younger generation or those people that are in that situation now, that they can, with hard work and effort and grit, do and achieve absolutely anything that they wish.
And that sounds like it's a real driving force for you.
Oh, 100%. Absolutely. You know, if I can do it, anybody can do it. Absolutely.
This episode is brought to you by Play for Change. Play for Change brings together leadership coaching, expert facilitation, and builds communities. They help craft real connections, spark learning, and turn play into powerful experiments to enable better relationships with yourself and others around you. To find out more, go to playforchange.co.uk. Links are in the show notes below.
What was I said demographic. What was I trying to, I couldn't even.
Democracy.
Yeah. Look,
Democratising.
they used to call me Ethel. Do you remember Ethel from, you're probably
EastEnders?
yes.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I'm not too young, unfortunately. But yes, I remember
So
Ethel.
she'd always get her words mixed up. That was me. So, and I still do it today. So that's when, because you don't have this massive repository of, really clever words. And that's another thing I'm always really conscious of. It's like, oh my God, I'm going to sound really stupid. But then I think actually thank goodness for Grammarly and stuff like that now, because that's allowed me to mask a lot of those inadequacies, I think.
But who's judging you?
Lots of people. I've been judged all out, I'd always get picked up on it, or I'd get picked up on my spelling or my grammar, or and now I know that was their issue, not mine.
Yeah.
Because it's really sad if all they've got to get at you is your grammar or the way that you've articulated something. It says more about them than me.
It does.
But it takes a lot of maturity and a lot of self-coaching to get to that stage.
And was it self-coaching? Was it through the coaching process that you've learnt to build the confidence and go, you for a better term, versus something else that happened and the work that you've done to accept who you are?
Both. I think it was, when we did the transition and was acquired by the global corporate, one of the things that was highlighted quite early was by the CEO, and she was incredible, by the way, and I'm very privileged to have got to spend some time working with her, was I lacked confidence. And which is ridiculous when you think about it, because a lot of people just assume that I'm really confident, but this underlying, all of those self-doubts and that all of those thoughts from, that early childhood and past experiences are what you sort of revert to automatically. It's that auto response, isn't it? So she said, let's get you a coach and see if we can work on that. So through that coach, we uncovered some of the stuff that we've discussed. Plus there was, early relationships also were a big part of that. Not choosing the right partner very young had a big impact on my confidence, because if somebody tells you enough times you're not good enough, over time you start to believe that, especially when you're young, because you're so vulnerable to all of these outside influences, because you've not formed that logical part of your brain yet that tells you that's just nonsense.
Yep.
That's just them, not you. But you take that as your real emotion, and then this is what builds the chimp, and then all of a sudden that's what comes out when you get these trigger points. So there was that was the start of that process. And then I was like, that when you come to that realization, you're like, I am no longer going to let that idiot have any space in my head ever again, because you're not that great to have any part of my thought process.
Yeah.
So do one. That was that. And then I think as I went through the coaching accreditations myself, and you'll know this, you become your own coach, don't you? It's just
try to.
It's like, what do I like this?
Yeah.
Like, have this constant conversation. And then through the work I do with my coachees and the training and more importantly with the channel community stuff that I do, and you've got to be the person that you want them to be. Yeah. So it's no good telling somebody to believe in themselves if you don't do that yourself. And that was what also inspired me to write my book, because it was getting people to understand the root cause as to why they lack the confidence, not just deal with the symptoms.
In terms of that process of you speaking to your own and being your own coach and having what I describe as the angel and the demon, or the angel and the devil, on your shoulders and going, yes, no, and constantly fighting that battle, what's the negative self-talk that you have to manage for yourself?
Like that I am good enough, that I value myself, that I do deserve to be here, I do deserve that place. And actually that's only been quite recent because it's still quite raw. Someone once said to me, Yvonne, people won't value you until you value yourself. And I don't think I quite appreciated that, how much that was true reflection of how I was feeling until quite very recently.
Yeah.
And I think that comes from my upbringing and my background and the low social demographic, and knowing that because you're so appreciative and grateful, you're so happy with everything that you have because it's way more than everybody else, you don't probably value yourself in the same way that you would naturally coming from a much more privileged upbringing, because you see it today with the entitlement and the expectation that people have because they don't have to work or graft because stuff is just given to them. We didn't have that. Mm-hmm. And I think it's that value piece that I'm still working on now. But because of the work that I'm doing and want to do more of as part of the evolution of the channel community, that is the bit that I myself are going to work the hardest on and also help others with themselves.
If you had one top tip for someone listening to this, what would be your advice to them about what they should do to get better at their self-talk?
Identify it. So work out what it is, because I think a lot of people, it's a lot of noise that goes on in your head. And one of the things I've learned, and I think has had the biggest positive impact for myself, is it's just a thought. Just know that most of what you think about is just that, a thought. It's not an actual fact.
Yeah.
So take everything that you're thinking about yourself negative, write it down on a piece of paper and actually go through it and say, well, that's just a thought. It's not a fact. Because 9 times out of 10, probably 99 out of 100, that's all it is.
Yeah.
So firstly, write down what it is, the thoughts that you're thinking, compartmentalize them into what's real and what's just a thought. And then if it is real, if you have evidenced it and you know, then that's the one thing that you can work on to get better and improve yourself.
Yeah. Great advice.
Thank you.
When we spoke earlier, you talked about I call it a CV, but I know it's not. So I'd love you to talk about what your salary CV and what you found when you did this piece of work.
Yeah, so a few months ago, I got asked by a friend to do an interview as part of a social mobility learning module she was creating for some of her clients. And it was on that process that they mentioned the class pay gap. And I was like, what's the class pay gap? I'd never even heard of it. And Tony, our mutual friend, had also mentioned it. And I was like, I'm going to have a look into this because I'd never... And then when I did, that was it. Once you know something, you can't unknow it, right? And it was like, oh my gosh, this is so ridiculous. I mean, the fact that depending on your low, your social economic background, you're paid on average as a white woman 16% less than your peers. And I was like, actually, that probably makes a lot of sense as to why I've been paid less. Thinking, going back to the YTS for a start, starting on low salary is not going to help. So I did a little bit of my own analysis on my own career. I thought I'm going to do a bit of a interesting view here. So I mapped my personal career. And I know, and this is based on evidence I know from my past roles and also, from experience and knowledge that I've had. So this is all factual. This is not just made up.
Mm-hmm.
And I mapped my career, and over the course of my 30-year career, it was a £621,000 pay gap.
Okay. And when you discovered that, how did that make you feel?
That wasn't okay. A bit frustrated, and wanting to not allow that to happen to other people.
Yeah.
Again, it goes back to that gratitude and the fact that, and the not valuing yourself, And I think this is quite consistent from a lot of people who have come from humble beginnings. You're so happy and grateful for everything. You don't ask for more. And combine that with being female, you've got a double-edged sword. So, women generally don't appreciate their worth more than the man. Combine that with coming from a low socioeconomic background, you're doubly impacted. So that's, I didn't need to earn any more money. So for me, why ask for it? Whereas, and I know, in the early years, it was because it was an apprenticeship, and I remember getting promoted at the age of 19. So I'd already passed my 2-year YTS, and my first salary, my permanent salary, was like £6,000 a year. I was like, yes, I'm like winning. I can go and buy a VHS player now.
Yeah.
I can go and get a credit card. It's like, wow. I then got promoted quite early on to being a sales coordinator, and it was the first time that anyone had anybody of my age in that role. And I was responsible for £13.5 million a year. And I was a full-time employee at this point, so the YTS was long gone. And the person that I was replacing was on £25,000 a year. The person that they brought in to do the job that I'd just been promoted out of was getting paid £15,000 a year. How much do you think I was getting paid?
I feel like this is a very trick question, so I'm going to go with somewhere like 12.
11. £11,000 a year. So because I started, so that is on the company, right? That's not okay. So the company should not have allowed that to happen, irrespective of the fact that the individual doing the role that I was doing was older, maybe had a degree. It was the same job.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not expecting to go in on the same salary that he was getting paid, but at least pay me the salary you've just paid someone to do my old job, which is an admin role,
Why shouldn't you be paid for the job that you're doing? Because clearly they think you have the skills, the capability and the resources to do it, regardless of whether or not you've got a degree or not.
It's a really good question. The degree thing is, I agree, is totally irrelevant. That's again something else I've had to get over. That's taken a lot of work.
Yeah.
Because of people's perception of a value of a degree. Ironically, that's never held me back, not having a degree, but it's still this little niggle. I think because obviously I was new to the role.
Okay, so you're developing into a role.
So you're not going to pay someone that's just coming into a role. So like a leveling up, right? But bearing in mind, I was the most experienced, been promoted out of the former role as a quality administrator. You'd at least give me the salary that you've just hired someone in to replace me on, because I was experienced. I was the best at that job. I've been promoted into a more senior role, yet you're paying me £4,000 less.
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah.
But at the time, again, I was so happy. I was earning way more than my friends. I was just got my BTEC.
Because your comparator is different. Because your social network is different to who you're comparing yourself to.
Yes, correct.
And that's why comparison is an evil.
Yes, correct. Yeah, I totally agree. And then later on, when I got more, when I was in a sales role, that sort of leveled out. I was always the same. And then it was only when I started more senior positions, and then that was more on me rather than the company, because I think I just never asked for it. And I would have, like, in the 4 years I was a director, I used to get a budget every year to give my division pay rises. And for 4 years, I never took one myself because I would rather...
That wouldn't come from your budget. Technically, your salary comes from the previous... anyway, I could go technical into that.
Yeah, I was given an allocation of how much of a pot of money to allocate.
Including yourself.
Including myself.
That's ridiculous.
And I would always forego any pay rise and try and give and
More
try and
to your
level
team.
up
The
team because I didn't need it. Yet there'd be people that were less senior than me in the same division who were getting paid the same salary as me because of who they knew in the organisation.
So it's still all about who you know in your network.
It was still about all you know in your network. And, you know, even though I tried to change that, that was unchangeable. I was in very difficult position. Untenable, there you go. I couldn't, there you go. So I've got some big words in there. To sort of to try and change that. And so that was, I think, on me more than on the company, because if I'd have pushed for it and if I'd have asked for it and if I'd have been more assertive and appreciated my value more, then I would have probably, you know, they probably would have given it to me. I just never asked for it.
Yeah, maybe. Mm-hmm. One to ponder on.
Maybe I'm being too nice.
Maybe. What's next for you?
Oh. As in, so continue doing what I'm doing. Now, like I said, once you know something, you can't unsee it. So because of the work I did on that career, the class pay gap on my own career, and partnership now that we have with the Social Mobility Foundation as part of the channel community, it's about how can we drive more awareness and create more opportunities for people to appreciate their value. Mm-hmm. So working in parallel with them to try, and so we're hosting some events with, I'm very fortunate that I have an amazing network in the tech channel. So I'm utilising that network to bring these organisations together to try and help drive positive change. I was even more mortified when the Tech Talent Charter recently announced their figures that only 9% of people from the tech industry come from a low socioeconomic background.
And when you say the
9%.
When you say the tech channel, what does that mean?
So the IT channel is made up of a multitude of organisations. So it's the vendors, which are the manufacturers. So they're the sort of the top of the tier. So they're the people that make products or software. Then you have the distributors. So they're the people that distribute the products or the services or the solutions or the software.
Fine.
Then you have resellers, which resell it to and then you have the end user. So that is what we call the channel.
Fine.
So that's the IT channel. So that's the industry that I've been in for the past 25 plus years and still remain in as the work that I do from a training, coaching and the channel community.
Okay. And going back to your fact, only 9% come from a low socioeconomic background in terms of employees.
Correct. So out of the entire tech industry, only 9% of employees come from a low socioeconomic background, which is ridiculous. And do you know another point? What I find even more frustrating, and I see this happening, it's getting worse. So, and the reason it's getting worse is because all these companies, they're going down the apprentice route, which is amazing. But that's a great step forward. But who are you giving the apprenticeships to? It's the high achieving, elitist, entitled people that have come from public school or are doing incredibly well academically are now getting the apprenticeships that should have been given to, who would have been given to people like me. So I feel, again, even more privileged that I was born and brought up in a generation where apprenticeships were given to people that needed them, not just because it
was a choice.
It was a choice. And they, you know, these people that are doing the apprenticeships now, they can afford university. But they just choose not to go down that route. So the problem's getting worse, not better.
I'm still stuck on I'm still stuck on the 9% only come from a low socioeconomic background in that tech channel, in the IT tech channel. I'm still stuck there. And And so that explains why you're trying to create this CIC.
Yes.
How do people find out more or get involved, or what do you need?
So if you're in the IT channel, then we'd love you to come and be a mentor, or, if you know people that need a mentor, then please, offer your services or just highlight that it's available. It's a free of charge service. We don't charge for it. So we've got a website, which I'm sure you'll
put on the show notes,
rather than trying to read it out now and get my words mixed up again and give you the wrong one. So we've got a website. Just go on there. All the details on there. We've got a LinkedIn page as well. We also run networking events, because one of the things that I was incredibly aware of was the fact that our industry is quite intimidating, especially if you're from a low socioeconomic background as well. It can be even more intimidating. So we run networking events, which are, again, free to come along to. We do about 4 a year, where people that are looking to get into the industry, already in the industry and looking for support or encouragement, can come along for free. Yeah. And they're at various locations, mainly in around central London.
Cool.
And there's a safe space. So we have a no idiot policy.
Love it. We started this conversation with who is Yvonne? I'd like to go full circle and give you the opportunity to go and amend, change, adapt based on this conversation. So who's Yvonne?
So Yvonne's just trying to make everybody feel like they deserve to be a somebody, and wants to help everybody believe that they are capable of whatever they choose to be.
What an incredible, impactful way to end. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed that conversation, please share A Class of Their Own podcast with your friends and family. Subscribe, follow and like. It really helps us continue to grow. Keep being you through connection, learning and play. You are a class of your own.